and thanks for visiting our website, rebuilderinabox.com. Today we're going to be rebuilding the GM truck alternator, known as the DR44G, on newer models. Identification is easy on this type because the DR44 is stamped right into the front casing by the pulley. Taking the plastic cover off to observe the inside, you'll see 3 access holes indicated by the yellow dots. What you want to do is stick 2 screwdrivers down inside and pry outward to raise up the tank so you can lift up one side at a time. Then stick 1 screwdriver down over here and pry outward. Not pocket screwdrivers, but small shank screwdrivers, doesn't matter Phillips or not. Looking at the inside, we have the rectifier here, voltage regulator, and then this is the slip ring and the brushes inside this. What they've done on this to inhibit rebuilding, or kind of discourage rebuilding, is the negative diodes on the rectifier are press fit into the rear plate and then spot welded at these junctions here. So if you have a diode problem, you have a pretty labor intensive problem. However, most of these units are pretty well serviceable by voltage regulator replacement, brushes, and bearings. To get the pulley off, you need a 1/2 inch impact and a 15/16 socket. Put a rag on the pulley or wear a glove. And the pulley usually comes right off. If not, get 2 screwdrivers and wedge them in behind it and pry it off. For now, it's a good idea to put the pulley nut back on the threads to protect them from getting dinged around while you're doing any other work. First, we're going to take the regulator off, and you'll see the 3 screws holding it down, and then the nut on this post. This is a 10 millimeter. Take it off. Then these 3 screws are an E5, or reverse Torx, some people call it, size number 5. On the output post, this outside tube or ferrule has to come off, and it has knurls down on the bottom of it to make it fit onto the post. So what we need to do is put the nut up on the top of the threads and tap down on it lightly to break the ferrules loose, and then get a pair of channel locks and twist it off and pull it up. There's a close-up shot of the knurls that the outside tube sits on, and when you put that back together, that both parts have to be clean with a wire toothbrush. The knurls there, and also the internal part of the tube. Right down below the output post, the voltage regulator has a solder connection to the rectifier. And what it is, there's a metal tang right here that comes straight up out of the rectifier. And then the voltage regulator has a push-on spade connector, something like that there. And you have to get that hot enough to melt the solder, and then when you see the solder liquefy, pull it off. Now what you need to do that soldering job is at least a 200 watt soldering gun. We're going to use one that's a lot hotter than that for demonstrative purposes because I want to show you a little trick that we do. We heat it up and then smack it sideways. And what that does is that flings all the solder out of there as it's hot. Then you can see in there pretty well, and you can either get a little pocket screwdriver or some sort of a windshield tool sharpened to a point and you can start to pick away some of the solder a little bit, maybe pry open the connection somewhat. Then when you heat it up again, watch for the solder to liquefy and pull straight up. Now we want to take apart the 4 bolts that hold the thing together. You can use the proper E-size Torx bit, reverse Torx bit tool if you want to, but a 6-sided 1/4 inch works perfectly fine every time. Now we want to hold on to the back half and tap off the front half on the plate with a hammer. Tap in 180-degree increments. Tap a little bit on one side, go all the way around. Sometimes it's a good idea to put a little bit of rust bust or WD-40 down in the bearing. Possibly apply a little bit of heat there. But usually they come right off. Now we have the bearing in the front plate and the rotor still inside the stator rear assembly. Now what we're going to do is hold on to the shaft and start tapping it. Till it comes out. There's a spacer on the drive end in between the actual rotor body and the bearing, and we have to take note that there's a flat side and a raised up side, and the extra ring, the raised up side, goes on the side next to the rotor. We need to inspect the slip rings where the brushes ride, in this area here and here. Most of the time there'll be grooves on them, but if you can clean it up with a Scotch-Brite and it's not burnt through to the black plastic underneath, it's reusable. Now we're faced with this design factor. Here it's kind of a bump in the road getting this rear bearing off. First things first, if you don't have high mileage on your vehicle, or if it's been recently rebuilt and you're undergoing some sort of a voltage regulator defect, possibly the bearing will be good. You can test the bearing by holding it in your fingers and spinning it. And if you feel any roughness, then the bearing is probably not reusable. If it feels nice and smooth, especially after you've taken seal out and put a couple drops of oil in it, then the bearing would be considered reusable under most circumstances. However, if you do need to remove the rear bearing, which is normally the case, sometimes you can wedge 2 screwdrivers 180 degrees apart between the plastic and the bearing itself. Then if you apply a little bit of heat, don't pry up with the screwdrivers, but turn them to try and get the bearing to break loose. If it won't break loose for you, the alternative method is to put the bearing in a vise so that the jaw is closed, missing the plastic fan, but tightening up on the outer race of the bearing itself. And what we're going to do is tighten the vise down so tight that it cracks the outer race of the bearing itself because it forces it out around. And as a safety feature, we have to put a piece of cardboard and a rag, because when you tighten it so tight that actually explodes, and it can, shrapnel can cut you. It's nothing serious, but the best thing to do is put a piece of cardboard on there first and then put a rag over everything so that when it does explode, it can't hurt you. So what we're going to do is just super tighten up the vise by tapping on the handle to such a point to where it squeezes the bearing out